Hey, what's up, y'all? It's me coming back at you. Well, this time, just a quick video. Yeah, to be fair with you guys, I just don't have much time to be doing videos on YouTube anymore. Got a family to take care of, so that's a priority, and other stuff going on. But it is what it is. But at the same time, I still, chat about boxing offline with a few buddies on WhatsApp, whatnot. So that's just my day in life with the YouTube boxing community, social sphere. But I just want to come and break this news to you guys. Those who haven't heard already, now you may have now known at this moment while I record this little short video, is that Big George Foreman had passed away today or moments ago at the age of 76. His family announced it via his official Instagram account not too long ago. The cause of death is unknown. So with that, that is Foreman was the last surviving member of the four kings of the heavyweight golden era of the 1970s. Him, um, Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, and famously Muhammad Ali, who had sadly passed away several years before. Um, what do you say about George Foreman in his career? George, just to give a brief background about his life, came from a very impoverished situation. Big family of I think four kids, 4 or 5 kids. His mother was struggling, waitress, and barely had any enough food to eat while they were growing up. But during his teenage years, George was getting into some bit of trouble. But he did find his peace when he decided to join the Peace Corps at the age of I think 16 or 17. But soon after that, he took up boxing. And at the age of 19, I believe, yeah, it was 19 or 18, he fought for the United States on his boxing team and won the Olympic gold medal in 1968. And then 4 years after that, I believe he wins the world heavyweight title. He beats Joe Frazier, annihilated him in 2 rounds. Then after that, he defended his title against, forgot some journeyman, forgot his name, but he did make his second defense against Ken Norton, who he also iced in 2 rounds, destroyed and wiped him out. And then after that, he defended his title against Muhammad Ali, which is famously rumbled in a jungle. Kind of a strange situation how how they made that fight. Don King was the one who was able to get that fight together and organized it. It was kind of weird because Don King was the one who got both George Foreman and Muhammad Ali to sign a contract that did not even list any terms. But he promised them, hey, this is what you're going to get. I promise you the proceeds will come to you afterwards. And then next, he did take it to the highest bidder and got the fight staged to Zaire, which is formerly now known as, which is now known as the Congo, Republic of the Congo. But anyhow, George, after the losses to Ali, he retired. Well, he didn't retire soon after that. He fought Ron Lyle. Before that, I think he took on some 5 opponents in some farcical event where he fought 5 guys the same night. And Ali was at ringside, and Foreman yelled at him and said, hey, where's my rematch? Yada, yada, yada. But anyhow, he fought Ron Lyle, which was a 5-round war, I believe. It was 4 or 5-round heavyweight war, which was one of the greatest heavyweight classics we've ever seen. When you would think that Foreman was going to get knocked out in that fight, but somehow, some way, he found enough conditioning and stamina to outlast Lyle. Because that's the thing about Ron Lyle. Ron Lyle at the time was a very dangerous heavyweight contender. Pretty big puncher, pretty durable. But the thing about Lyle is the thing about Lyle is that he would gas out in fights. So, because he was one of those heavyweights that was known to load up his punches early. Try to get his opponents out of there. Kind of like he had. I mean, it worked with him against Ernie Shavers because Ernie Shavers arguably had the not so great, stamina opposed to Ron Lyle and other guys during that era. But I digress. But anyway, he fought Lyle. He fought Joe Frazier in a rematch where, to be fair, Frazier was at the end of his career at the time when he fought Foreman in their rematch. And, Frazier did a little bit better, obviously. He lasted, I think, 5 rounds before he got stopped again by Big George Foreman. Then after that, Foreman fought Jimmy Young. Lost that fight in a stunning upset in Puerto Rico. Then soon after that, George retired and decided to go into ministry and, take away, and left boxing for 10 years during that period. Of course, the backstory behind that, while he was an ordained pastor, he fell into some bit of financial troubles, and the only way to get himself out of that, he had to get back into boxing. Kind of a bit of a weird run in his earlier second run as a heavyweight. He fought a bunch of nobodies. And I think was quoted that he himself when during his comeback he didn't want to fight anybody in the top 10 at the time, when Tyson was reigning as a champion. And what his goal was to fight these low level guys until he get himself in position to fight Tyson without fighting some dangerous contenders. Now again, you can argue that Big George already beat the likes of Frazier and Norton and Lyle and whatnot. So he was worthy of he didn't have to fight those top 10 guys to get to Tyson. Some would argue that, but at the end of the day, if you're gonna come back and you say you want to fight Mike Tyson, who was a reigning heavyweight, young, dangerous, undisputed champion, then you're gonna have to earn that right to fight him. You know what I mean? But anyways, I digress on that part. But anyhow, he did take on some, guys who was on his level, who were known to be great, but they were way past their best. Dwight Muhammad Ali, which is a well-known, obviously, natural light heavyweight who fought Foreman at heavyweight. It was kind of interesting how that fight played out because Ali was actually giving Foreman some trouble early on in that fight. Foreman couldn't even hit the target because he was missing him on those shots. But it was one notable shot in that fight, which was very, very, very strange to me. Very unique moment, and it's kind of odd when George Foreman, when the refs tell you no kidney punches, right? I mean, Foreman literally hit Kawi in the kidney. I mean, literally hit him in the kidney and with a wild right hook to the kidney. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, when did you ever see somebody do that? I mean, it looked very awkward. But, I mean, anyhow, he stopped Kawi in that fight. I mean, and again, Foreman really had some serious trouble early on against a way past his best Muhammad Kawi, who's been through some wars at light heavyweight and cruiserweight. But anyhow, after that, he fought Jerry Cooney, who was also not, Jerry Cooney wasn't a great heavyweight, but he was a very viable contender in the, early 80s before Larry Holmes got to him. But yeah, Cooney, he fought Cooney and knocked him out very badly, with left uppercut and then a right cross, and that effectively ended Jerry Cooney's career. And I remember Gil Clancy was training Jerry Cooney at that time. He was in his corner. But anyhow, that win, I think, if I'm not mistaken, positioned George Foreman at a shot against Evander Holyfield in 1991 in Atlantic City for the undisputed heavyweight title. And I remember that time when that fight was announced. And this is when Holyfield was coming off a win against Burt Cooper after he fought and knocked out Buster Douglas to capture the title. And mind you, Evander, was it after the Burt Cooper fight that he fought George Foreman, or was it a fight before that? I could be wrong. I have to go back and check. I believe it was a fight after the Cooper fight that he fought Foreman, or it was a fight before that. You guys can help me out in the comment section because I'm just going off the top of my head. But anyhow, beating Jerry Cooney at the time gave George Foreman, pretty much, or was it Jimmy Ellis? Not the Jimmy Ellis that beat George, who fought George Foreman back in 1970. I think it was 1976 or 78. Not that Jimmy Ellis. It was another Jimmy Ellis. It was like some, French contender that he fought under I think it was under a Mike Tyson undercard, but I don't know. But anyhow, he beats him, and then he faces Holyfield. Wow. But, I remember back then when I was a kid, a lot of people in the media at the time ridiculed that fight. And they called Holyfield a paper champion because the fact that why would you fight this guy, a 42-year-old George Foreman who's way, way past his best, who's not in the best condition of his career at that point. You fight him rather than fight Razor Ruddock. And I remember people were accusing Holyfield ducking the Razor Ruddock fight, which he did, but he elected to fight George Foreman instead. And Foreman took the fight, okay? And I get it. And people were arguing that Foreman didn't even deserve the shot because he didn't fight nobody to get that shot against Holyfield. But, needless to say, that one turned out to be one of the best fights of the year. In fact, one of the rounds was around the year, I think it was round 7, when both Holyfield and Foreman was loading up a lot of power shots against each other. And Foreman gave a good account of himself in that fight. Yes, he clearly lost that fight. I mean, it was good to see that he had legends like Archie Moore and Angelo Dundee in his corner, giving him advice, what he needs to do, what adjustments he needs to make. But they stuck with him, and I think until he beat Michael Moore for the title. But I'm getting a little forward at myself. But anyways, I guess I could transition to that. But after he lost, George was praised for that performance, in a losing effort. And people say, we shouldn't even doubt this guy. He can actually still hang. But to be fair, George didn't really. He did fight some top guys while trying to reclaim the title. He fought Tommy Morrison, lost that fight for the vacant WBO title. And this is the same Tommy Morrison, and rest his soul as well. The same Tommy Morrison was coming off a loss against Ray Mercer, a bad knockout loss. But anyhow, Foreman, throughout his career, the second part of that half of his career was very careful who he wanted to fight. He literally openly ducked Riddick Bowe. He even announced on a live broadcast covering the Riddick Bowe fight against Jorge Luis Gonzalez. And when Jim Lampley asked him straight, bluntly in his face, "Do you want to fight Riddick Bowe after that performance?" After Bowe destroyed and ran through Gonzalez, the same Gonzalez that beat him in the amateurs, and George said, "No, hell no, I'm not fighting Riddick Bowe." And George kind of knew exactly what he was going up against, those 90 heavyweights. He knew. But anyhow, he fought him, and then he ended up getting a shot against Michael Moore, the same guy who beat Evander Holyfield for the unified title. Who, by the way, Evander Holyfield just beat Riddick Bowe to recapture the title. Okay? So, they didn't give George much of a chance in that fight. And, looking at that fight, he was clearly getting dominated from the first round until he stopped Moore to capture the world heavyweight title, the oldest man to do it at the time. Anyhow, yeah, so he fights Michael Moore, stops him in round 10 with a good 1-2. And Moore, who was a very good fighter at the time, southpaw heavyweight. But the thing about Michael Moore, what he was, what he didn't really have was that, great durability. Yeah, not saying he didn't have the worst durability. Michael Moore's durability was always in question to some extent. So, yeah, I know. I digress on that as well. But anyways, George becomes the oldest heavyweight champion in history, capturing unified heavyweight title, Lenio and Ring Magazine, and WBA and IBF heavyweight titles from Michael Moore. Then after that, oh boy, that championship run was not stellar, to say the least. And I'm just being very kind to Big George Foreman. You know what I mean? Respect him, revere him as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. But that heavyweight run was a farce, to say the least. I'm not saying the farce, but it was one of the most lackadaisical heavyweight runs I've ever seen. Because Foreman at the time was very, very, very careful who wanted to fight after he picked up the titles. He fought Ashton Schultz in a IBF mandatory defense, and he clearly lost that fight. He looked lethargic. George was never always the best technical fighter out there as far as heavyweight's concerned, but he looked very lethargic. He couldn't really land anything on Schultz, but he got a gift decision. And the IBF, Schultz team protested the decision, which they rightfully should have. And I will say that Schultz should have deserved the decision. But, at the end of the day, Foreman got the win. And the IBF petitioned him to, Schultz's team petitioned the IBF, I believe. And I think the IBF says, look, we can't reverse the results of what happened. The least we can do is reorder the rematch between Foreman and Schultz. And I think Foreman, after that, realized that, I'm not going to fight this guy again. I can't beat him. So I was lucky I was able to get the decision. So he vacated the IBF title. And then after that, he was mandated to fight Tony Tucker, I believe, who was a mandatory for the WBA. And he vacated the WBA title at that point, too. So he vacated his alphabet belts and kept the Lenio status and the Ring Magazine belt. And he fought guys like Crawford Grimsey and Lou Savarese. Which, I'm like, wow, okay. But then he ended up fighting Shannon Briggs for the Lenio strap after... to defend it against Shannon Briggs, and Briggs beat him. And then after that, Big George retired. He went on to make more millions and millions of dollars off of his grill. And he did some punditry, commentary work. Which, by the way, I may have to say that, in my opinion, Big George was one of the more revered, respected commentators I've ever seen. Now, some may disagree with that assessment. I get it, but I think he was one of the best boxing fighter commentators I've ever seen. Aside from Roy Jones and Paul Malignaggi, even though Paulie does say some weird shit, but he knows his stuff. Yeah, so yeah, but he did retire from, pretty much from boxing altogether in 2005. I think the last fight that he commentated was Ricardo Mayorga versus Michelle Picciarello for the vacant 154-pound WBC title. I think that was the last fight he commentated on King's Vision, which was Don King's own private network at the time when he ran it, King Television. But it is what it is. But anyhow, it's sad to hear that one of the greatest heavyweights of all time has now left us. So again, as I mentioned earlier on this video, George Foreman was the last surviving member of the four kings of the heavyweight era of the 1970s, and now all of them are gone. They all left us. They all left us, and I'm sure they're all in another place in the afterlife, telling great stories about their careers and the lives they had outside the ring, the families they were able to produce and raise. So all I gotta say is, Godspeed, rest in peace to Big George Foreman. You know, thank you for the unbelievable memories you've given us to the sport of boxing. Thanks to your contribution, thanks to your expertise, and I have to say, thanks for looking after your family and doing it the right way that a man should do. And with that said, I'm out.